This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name is Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your host on this next journey of basket casey and indeed showcasey goodness. I'm flying solo again today for this little bit without Steve, who is otherwise tied up on a million other projects and out and about saying hi to lots of the wonderful people that we work with pretty much every day. So joining us today is Jess, our wonderful producer and editor who's actually conducted this interview for us. This is the third and final episode in our disaster recovery mini-series, so we hope you've been enjoying this so far, and it's been a really good way to listen to the way that people go about preparing for disasters and then working their way through it, and just the fact that you can hear the resilience in their voice as they're going through these interviews it's been inspiring for me, certainly, and I'm sure that everyone who's listened has taken a lot out of it, and today will absolutely be no different. Today we're hearing from the wonderful Paula Sale, who's the president at Western Districts Netball Association, right on the bend on the Brisbane River. So when the Brisbane River came into flood again in 2022 for the second time, a massive flood in just 11 years, WDNA got smashed again. But they learnt a lot in 2011 that they were able to apply in their recovery after the 2011 floods, which then meant that the 2022 floods, while they were pretty shitty for them, they certainly weren't as bad as they could have been. So they went underwater. I remember seeing photos as it was all happening, photos on social media, and it was just amazing because, you know, I know the place pretty well. I run around there a bit and go for walks around there because it's close to where I go for tennis with with two of my kids. And to see the photos of where the water was up to on the roof, you go, there's a lot of water across here. So it was like you think of getting flooded and it going a foot through the clubhouse. Nah, this is much, much worse than that. A double-story clubhouse that is pretty much affected both levels. So you know how high it went. So these guys are a big organisation, and before, obviously COVID gave them a bit of a touch up. But in 2019, they had about 2,200 members, and by 2023, they're up to around 2,700 members. So they've well and truly recovered from COVID, and they're really back on the charge again. So as I said, they're located right on the bend in the Brisbane River in Graceville. And this episode, you're going to hear about the association's ability to really cope and bounce back from adversity. So they were as prepared as you can be, but when as they're one of those organisations that's built in a floodplain, so they're going to get smashed when they get flooded. But they did everything that they could to really do a good job. And you can, again, with the way that Paula speaks, you can just hear the resilience in her voice. And that resilience is based on an absolute passion and a love for netball and a love for Western Districts Netball Association. So you'll also hear in here plenty of other great initiatives that they've got going on. So with that said, I'm going to hand you over to the very capable Jess and the wonderful Paula Sale.
So your club has demonstrated showcase performance specifically through your organisational resilience when you've been faced with adversity. So can you share some of your key successes across this area for us to showcase to other associations?
Yeah, so Western Districts was actually affected quite badly in the Brisbane flooding in February 2022. We had just under 3 metres of water across our courts. You could just see the tops of the netball poles sticking out from the water. So a significant amount of water. Our clubhouse, fortunately, we were spared any water going into the second story because it stopped rising probably about 15 centimetres lower than the second story of the building. But it did mean that the lower story was, totally inundated. And there wasn't a great deal of time to prepare for that. It came as a surprise, if you like. We were very fortunate in that our admin officer lives quite close to the courts, and she went out at 6 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday when the water was rising and tried to get some equipment from downstairs up to the upper story, but obviously was limited in the amount of things she could save. So we pretty much lost everything in the lower story of the building. The water stayed up for probably about 3 days. By Wednesday, we were able to get back into the building, and our members just rallied around us. It was really fabulous. We got in, hosed everything out, chucked out a lot of stuff, and probably 3 days later, the initial cleanup was done. But of course, then the hard work came in terms of rebuilding. And initially we were looking at replacing like for like, so putting gyprock back where we had gyprock walls, etc. But we attended a Brisbane City Council resilience workshop, and that was just a game changer in terms of our attitude for our repairs. They talked very much about flood resilience and preparing for the same thing to happen again. And we completely changed our approach to the way we did our rebuild. We didn't put gyprock back in because obviously that doesn't cope very well with water. So all of the cabinetry we've put back in has been compact laminate. We've rendered brick walls. We've moved all of our as much of our electrical equipment as possible upstairs to the second story. So our main meter board, the building fuse boards, etc., have all been moved upstairs. Our court lights, we lost the drivers for the court lights, which were down at ground level. And rather than just replacing the drivers, we've replaced the lights themselves. It was slightly more expensive, but it meant that they had an internal driver. So now that's 14 metres above ground, and if we are to get another flood, then our lights will be fine. Whereas we were in a situation where we didn't have court lights for about 3 months after the floods, and we're having to borrow other association courts and make do with training in the daylight hours, etc. So that was a good outcome, I think, in terms of the repairs that we did on the lights. As I said, slightly more expensive, but it's certainly going to benefit us in the long run. Yeah, the other aspect that we've had to consider is we can't get insurance now for flood cover. We went under in 2011 and again in 2022, so we won't be able to get flood cover. And we are working on a contingency fund for a rainy day, or lots of consecutive rainy days that result in a flood. So we will keep a term deposit with sufficient funds. We haven't decided what that number will be, but several $100,000, so that if we do flood again, then we will be able to self-insure really.
Yeah. Have you gotten any grants or anything like that to help as well?
Yes, we've been very proactive, not just with floods, but probably over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been very proactive in applying for any grant that's available. And we've enjoyed a lot of support from local, state, federal governments. We've also received grants from various independent funding bodies. And we did get quite a few grants after the floods. And we were able to rebuild and assess the way that processes worked, and rebuild back better, if you like. So we reconfigured our canteen, for example, and have ended up now with a better, more functional canteen than we had prior to the floods. So that's been a bonus. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into that, and we did spend most of 2022 operating off a couple of power boards and extension leads that ran from upstairs, because our upstairs power was reinstated pretty quickly, but it was several months before downstairs had power back on. We sort of limped through 2022 with our canteen operations, but then once we did rebuild at the end of 2022, we really improved the way the canteen functions. Yeah, hopefully we've had some silver lining in the cloud for us. So for that direct, those few days directly after the flood, we were just inundated with volunteers. It was really fabulous. A lot of our members came and hired high pressure water gurneys themselves and a generator, because obviously we didn't have power to run that equipment. It just came in, and we pretty much just hosed out the whole bottom floor of the clubhouse and the sheds, etc. And we've got some local businesses who sponsor us. So we've got an electrician and a plumber who sponsor us, and they both came in and supported us as well. So shout out to Heat-Ons Electrical and Shaw's Plumbing. They were there. Obviously, we needed the electricians very quickly, and they got us up and running, at least with a little bit of power, pretty quickly. And Shaw's Plumbing were great. They just sent some of their apprentice plumbers in to help with the cleanup as well.
That's awesome. That's so good. Can you tell me about any big changes in the club that the club has made over the past 5 to 10 years that has led to the success? We actually undertook a bit of a governance review. I'm going to say back in 2017, I think we redid our constitution. We had been operating as a larger committee, and we moved to a board structure with subcommittees to manage individual areas of interest, such as an umpiring subcommittee, a coaching subcommittee, competition subcommittee, etc. So it probably took us a couple of years to find our feet in the way that structure worked, and the board probably took on more than they should have initially, but we're getting better at delegating the responsibility for various things to the subcommittees, and the board then just has more of an oversight role, and each of the subcommittees have a board representative on them who feeds that information back to the board. So it was a learning process for us, but as part of that, we also redefined some of the roles we had. We tried to split some of the larger roles. So, for example, in our coaching position, we actually now have 4 coaching roles rather than just one coaching coordinator. So we have someone who oversees all of the roles, but then we have someone who's responsible for the representative program, someone who helps develop the club coaches, and someone who helps run development programs for the players in the association. So we've just tried to make some of those larger roles a little less onerous. In the umpiring space, we've put in some umpire liaison officers who deal directly with the clubs, and again, just trying to make it easier to find volunteers. We do have more volunteers now, but they're probably smaller roles than they were previously. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a very broad approach, and have tried to look at inclusion in netball, which has included people with disabilities playing in our night season competition. We've got a couple of deaf teams who play in that competition. The Queensland Gems, who are an all abilities team, some of their players play in our night season competition. We changed our bylaws and our uniform policy, which allowed more inclusive uniforms. So whether that's for religious reasons or just girls are uncomfortable wearing a dress, then they've got options in terms of leggings, shorts, whatever they feel comfortable wearing. So we've tried to do a fair bit in that inclusion space. We got some grant funding for including players from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. So we support those girls by paying their registration, paying for their uniforms, etc. So we've been doing a fair bit in terms of trying to broaden our membership.
and part of that has included, we've put flags up on the clubhouse. So in Netball Connect, we downloaded all of the data from where our members come from, what their ethnicity is. So we've got 38 different flags up now around the clubhouse, which represent all of our members. So we do a First Nations round, and generally like to think that we've got an inclusive association, and we're working hard in a number of areas to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of our members.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really good. Leading on, what are things like now for the club?
Good. We're still working on new projects.
Yeah.
So at the moment we've got 20 hard courts, but we've also got 4 smaller grass courts, like 3/4 size courts that we use for our youngest members. The smaller courts, lower hoops, etc. But because they're grass, they suffer a fair bit. We're either in drought and they're a dust bowl, even though we do have irrigation on there, or through 2022 they were just so muddy because of the amount of rain we had the whole year. So we're looking at converting those to hard courts as well, and we're actually in talks at the moment with the Brisbane Pickleball Club, because we'd like to make them multi-use, so that we can use them for netball during the day, and then the pickleball club can use them at night to play pickleball as well. So that's early stages, but we're making connections with Brisbane City Council about whether we can do that, and have, as I said, multi-use courts that will be used from people aged 5 through to 80. In terms of new competitions, at the moment we're focusing a lot on player and coach development. We've had a very successful umpiring program over the last few years, a high performance and development program, resulted in 2 A badges in the last 2 years, which we had a 19-year drought between the last A badge we had and the one that we got last year, and then another A badge this year, and lots of B badged umpires being accredited as well. So we've had a very successful umpiring program over the last few years, and we're now really focusing in on the coaching side of things and trying to provide support to clubs so that they can develop their coaches, because obviously that impacts then on the skill level of the players as well, and our players coming into our representative teams, if they've got those basic skills that they've learned at club level, then when they come into the rep program, we can focus on more strategic development. So both coach and player development at the club level is our focus at the moment.
Yeah, awesome. All right. And going back to the governance kind of side of things, what general advice would you give to other clubs in relation to running a successful business?
To treat it like a business. I suppose that although you're a not-for-profit organisation, we pretty much are a large business now. We've got a reasonable turnover, we've got our own employees, we've got lots of volunteers that we manage. So treating the association as a business and making business decisions rather than decisions that are more from that sort of smaller mindset. We need to make decisions that impact the association favourably as a whole. It's not just a hard-nosed business approach, because we are very much about developing our players into, the junior players, developing them into strong young adults. So it's not a hard-nosed business approach, but it's certainly, when it comes to operation of the canteen, for example, we're running a business there and providing healthy options for people. but ensuring that, and we're going through a review at the moment of the canteen just to ensure that our pricing structure is at the right spot where we're providing a service for our members and providing healthy food options for them, but also we're covering our costs and making a bit of profit that then can be fed back into the association and our various programs that we run. One other thing that I didn't mention previously, we've introduced a youth board. So trying to get an idea of, the needs of our younger members. They're the ones that can best advise us on what they'd like to see. And they were instrumental in the development of or the adoption of our inclusive uniforms. They've modelled them for us, and we've promoted them within the association. And the youth board actually wrote to Netball Queensland to get their permission for our representative teams to use inclusive uniforms as well, which was provided by Netball Queensland. So that was good. They also ran a very successful sort of come and try day at the beginning of last year. And we had 5 and 6 year olds coming in and just having a fun day of netball at no charge, because our youth members did all of the work on that one, our youth board members. And it was a really successful event. So we actually got some grant funding to get that up and running. I mentioned earlier that we're pretty proactive in that grant space, and we've got funding for facility improvements, purchasing of equipment, recognition of volunteers, the inclusion program I mentioned earlier, to provide funding for registration fees and uniforms, etc., for members who might need that. So we've been very fortunate in the number of grants we've received, and it's really impacted the association in every aspect, right from the building of female facilities through to programs that we run to develop athletes. Yeah.
So do you have someone on your board who's constantly looking for grants, or what's your process for grants writing and grant seeking?
Yeah. Me.
Yeah.
And look, now people, if they see a grant, they'll just shoot it through to me and say, got any ideas for this? And that's probably how our youth board came about, because there was a grant about developing female leaders. And so we wrote, we had attended a Netball Queensland conference, and they'd mentioned a youth board, and we really liked that idea. So then we were able to marry those two things together: the grant the grant that was suitable for the youth board, and the idea of implementing a youth board. So that was really nice.
I think that's something that clubs struggle with, is constantly looking for grants and knowing that they can just apply. Yeah.
Awesome. We apply for everything.
Yeah. Because what's the harm in that,
Yeah, that's right. And actually, a sustainability grant came across my desk last week, and mainly looking at ways of decreasing reliance on normal energy sources. And I just couldn't think of another thing in our building that we could do that I could apply for that grant, just because we've got the solar system and a storage battery. We've changed every single light in the building to LED. Most of our, areas, such as the toilets, are on sensor lights. Our security lights are on sensor lights. So in terms of trying to find another project that we could apply for there, I'd actually run out of ideas. I mean, if we, I'll continue to look at sort of environment grants, because, a water tank to flush the toilets with, if we can find something for that, then I'll certainly apply for that. But in terms of the energy consumption side of things, we're pretty much as much as we can do at the moment, I think, unless technology improves and we can improve the fridges we have or something like that, then at the moment no more projects.
That's amazing. Well, that just shows you're doing a great job. That's amazing. Yeah.
We did have a president of Wests a few years ago, and she went on to become president of Netball Queensland. I'm not sure if you've heard of June Bothwell, but she was a really lovely lady. She passed away just a couple of weeks ago. But she always used to say, if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards. You know, everybody around you will continue to move. So if you think you're standing still, you're not. You need to be proactive all the time and continuing to learn and adapt and introduce new things. Otherwise, you'll be left behind. And I certainly agree with that sentiment. And that is something that we try and do.
And that's what you need to do, especially in the not-for-profit sector. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah. I also have been listening to Michael and Steve's basket case clubs. I got an idea from the podcast. They were talking about a reverse inclusion round. I think it was up in Townsville. There's a basketball club that has wheelchair basketball, and they do a reverse inclusion where even the able-bodied people have to play basketball in the wheelchair. And I thought that was a great idea for the two deaf teams that we have in playing our competition. So we've got a reverse inclusion round coming up because we use flags, whistles and flags normally. But so for on that round, we will just use the flags, and the hearing people will get an idea of, how hard it is to manage a game with just flags and no whistles. So hopefully that'll be a good opportunity to just increase the understanding amongst our members. So
yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there you go. It's just wonderful to hear Paula talk like that. And thanks, of course, to Jess for doing a great job in drawing all of that out. It was just a fantastic discussion. So that brings us to the end of our little Club Disaster Recovery mini-series. And we hope that you've got a lot out of it, even though we're talking largely here recovering from floods. This stuff, it really counts for whatever natural disaster you're facing. So Paula's one of those people who absolutely knows her stuff and is so passionate about what she does. And it really comes through in the way that she talks about the association. So Western Districts Netball Association is absolutely on the showcase end of our basket case clubs to showcase clubs continuum. And even when they face crap like going underwater when it floods, they're just so strong. But to hear then also about things like their inclusion, their reverse inclusion round that they did, and the youth board and the uniform options, they're truly remarkable and definitely something that everyone can learn from. So I hope that that's you as well. So thanks, of course, to Jess for being our wonderful producer and editor, and indeed our interview extraordinaire for this episode. Be sure to follow us on all the social channels and subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll see the links there in the description of this episode. If you haven't already done so, make sure that you follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on so you don't miss out on any of the fantastic stuff that we've got coming up as well. And of course, if you'd like to help somebody else find out about basket case clubs, please do spread the word by sharing a review on whatever platform it is that you listen on. And of course, we've got our wonderful basket case clubs merch when we'll have a little competition for somebody who leaves us a review, and the winner will be announced in December, just in time to get a nice little Christmas present from us. So with that, thanks very much again, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.